Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining. I see many familiar names and faces. So glad you're all here. I'm almost tempted to go right through the Zoom screen and talk to you each by name, but that would then, I'm afraid, take up a lot of time. But I do see somebody in the sea, which is beautiful, and a nice venues. We're here. We're in Switzerland, just outside Geneva. The place is called Mérin. It's an interesting place because it's also pretty full of coronavirus right now. So it's focusing our minds. I know everybody's connecting. This is like the music they have at the beginning of a program. You know, if you're watching House of Cards, if you like that's that beautiful music with the pictures of Washington fast forward, where those French horns come in just as the train goes under the bridge. I've always thought that was very good theme music. This is the theme music. Sometimes when we're doing briefings, we actually have music, but we've not got that far. I'd just like to introduce you to Thuy Nguyen, who is the head of communications in 4SD and is right at the center of the work that we're doing in support of the Food Systems Summit. Also is Florence Lasben, who you can see on my screen. She's next to me, which is exactly as it should be. She is the assignment lead in 4SD, tiny little organization, for all the work we're doing in support of the Food Systems Summit. Thuy and myself are combining our food work and our work on COVID. But when we're working on the Food Systems Summit, we are supporting the Secretariat. And by now, I think we've got most of the people who were in the waiting room have joined, and we are just after the top of the hour. So I'd like to declare this second of our open briefings now officially started. And just like to tell you what the structure is going to be and then how we're going to work it. So the initial minute or two is me just setting the scene, and then I'm going to hand over to a colleague, and then I'm going to be back again and offering you the briefing. But let me give you the structure. First of all, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. The second open public briefing on the Food Systems Summit Dialogues. It's a 1-hour briefing, 1700 to 1800 European time. Present at this briefing to work with you, myself, Florence Lasben, Marlène Schuckpath, Thuy Nguyen, and then we're also having with us Zach Bleacher from the Food Systems Summit Secretariat. Zach will give us an overview of the Food Systems Summit, and then I will follow up to talk about the dialogues program within the Food Systems Summit. I will explain why the dialogues are relevant, and I will also explain what a Food Systems Summit dialogue is. Then we're going to have a period for questions and answers. And the way I'd like to do it is, could you please indicate in the chat box if you want to ask any question? Otherwise, communicate with us by another channel, because given the large number of people on this Zoom call, it's quite difficult to use any visual recognition. And a lot of you have not got your videos on, all understandable. So in the end, it's easier if you use the chat box and then we can connect with you. We are recording, and that is simply so that those who either are unable to communicate because the internet and your location has not been strong enough, or alternatively, for some other reason, you just miss a bit of the briefing, the recording will be available, and it will be, I anticipate, posted on the Food Systems Summit website, and that will enable you to know what we talked about. Thank you very much indeed for coming, and thank you for making the time. So let me invite Zach Bleacher to now give us a briefing about the summit. And if you're here, Zach, if you'd like to take over the baton now, that would be great. Over to you, Zach.
Hello, thanks very much, David, and hello, all the colleagues on the line. I just do the usual Zoom call thing and confirm that you can hear me. The 4 people I can see can nod. Great. Okay. As I speak into the void, feel free to interrupt me. I may not be able to keep track of the chat box, but I'll do my best. And so thanks, David, very much for the introduction and the opportunity to speak to everyone here today. And thanks so much to everyone for your interest, obviously, in being here. Am I still? Okay, good. The screen switched. So, okay, good. It's always a journey, these calls. So what, obviously you're interested in the summit, so I'm here to tell you a little bit about it. And if you find my brief explanation inadequate, of course, feel free to get in touch with me directly, or there's a website now that you can find on un.org. It's basically un.org/FoodSystems-Summit, and that provides all the overview and all the information that's publicly available so far on the summit. But let me go ahead and speak to you a little bit about it. Basically, the Secretary General took it on himself to convene this summit next year. He announced his intention to do so late last year. And obviously, you might be aware of a certain pandemic that's been traveling around the world and certainly interrupted some of our well-laid plans. But really what the pandemic has shown us is just how urgent and important and relevant the Secretary General's decision to convene the summit was. You know, as I think everyone in this call probably knows, COVID has exposed so many fragilities and inadequacies in our economic and social fabric in our world. And one of the ones that we've seen the most is troubles in our food systems. And so what we're beginning to see is that the Food Systems Summit and the process that I'll talk to you a bit about is really an opportunity to explore how we can, as we build back better from COVID, as we recover from what's going on right now, we can really leverage our food systems and transform them in ways that make them more resilient, more sustainable, and more inclusive. And that makes us better able to cope with future crises, and also helps us continue to chart our course towards 2030. And this was really the original intention of the summit, and it remains so, is that what we have seen emerge, science and other experts are confirming what we already intuitively knew. Food systems and improving them is fundamental to making progress on the SDGs and all of the SDGs. This isn't about SDG 2 alone. It's about all 17 goals and embracing the entirety of the vision that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development provides us. And so that's what this summit is really about, it's really embracing the systems dynamic of thinking about our food and how it arrives at our plate, where it's grown, and where it goes after we're done with it. Those of us that are lucky to have a plate of food in front of us every single day. So that's the big idea. What makes this summit different, and what do you need to know about it? Well, the first is that this is a Secretary General convened summit. It means it's not a traditional summit. This isn't the usual 193 member states getting together, negotiating a document. Some people try to influence that document in different kinds of ways. That's not what this summit is. This summit is embracing the concept of networked multilateralism, if I can use that term colloquially. Basically saying, let's take a different approach here. We already have a document. It's the 2030 Agenda, it's the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, it's the Paris Climate Accord. That provides our direction of travel and what our common objectives are. We've agreed on that. What we don't necessarily agree on is how we get there. And what we know we probably agree on is we're not doing enough to get there. And this summit is about stimulating that dialogue, that conversation, but orienting it towards solutions and action. And that's going to unfold in a few different ways. The first are the action tracks. That's a bit modeled on the Climate Action Summit, which some of you may have participated in over the course of last year, but this time there's a reduced number. There's only 5 action tracks to better reinforce the integrated nature of the summit, the integrated approaches being taken. And also a core difference is that these are being led by, sectoral experts rather than member states themselves, really, again, embracing doing business differently. Everyone's invited to engage in these action tracks, and they're also doing a similar exercise as this one, where you can start to publicly engage with the different action track leaders, and you can read a bit more about the action tracks on the website that I mentioned. They've already released very informal discussion starter papers just to start to get ideas out there and stimulate discussion and get us thinking about where we might want to go and how we might use the opportunity the summit provides us. So in these action tracks, they're multi-stakeholder in nature. So you'll have member states, you'll have civil society, you'll have private sector, you'll have researchers. We hope everyone's there and is able to come and sort through what are the tough issues and how can we agree on what are some of the game-changing solutions and what real action might look like to help us motivate progress. The second is that there's an independent scientific group that's been set up. And this group will travel along with the summit and be thinking about and sense check ideas that are emerging from different work streams, and also inject some of their own into the process. Again, building on the evidence base that we already have and advancing that as we go along. And maybe the third and final area that I'll just highlight for the purposes of this call and the limited time we have is what we're all coming together around. And that's another core element, that's the Food Systems Summit dialogues. David and his team will go into more detail, but this is really a core element, and I think one of the most exciting elements of this process. It's really pushing out this engagement again. How do we reach the most people possible and engage them in different ways around getting them to think about food in a systems way? How can we get them to think about food in their communities, food in their countries, and exploring the local realities that food systems present? There is no global food system per se, right? There's many food systems, and we need to think about what's going on where we are and how those relate with one another. So what we've done working with David and his colleagues is come up with a segmented program that allows us to explore food systems from a government-led perspective, but also think about it from very different kind of constituency-led perspective. So independent dialogues that are driven by communities, constituencies, or can even explore themes or regions. So I don't want to preempt what David's going to share with you, but this is something that we think is really exciting. And we'll also be trying to structure, again, that each of these different work streams that we have set up are talking to each other, that this summit and all of its work stream are a system themselves, and that we approach them in an integrated way and ensure that there's checkpoints throughout the process where we're sense checking one another, we're able to bounce ideas, and the feedback that evolves throughout is informing what the final outcomes look like and ensuring that we can really get, after the summit comes, we're already implementing actions that happen and continuing the good discourse that hopefully this summit helps to motivate well beyond and on the road to 2030. So maybe I'll pause there and thanks again for the opportunity to speak with you. Over.
Well, I want to just really say at the outset, what a joy it is working with Zach and the colleagues who are part of the Secretariat that Dr. Agnes Kalibata, the Special Envoy, has set up. And Zach, thank you. Zach is in New York and very, very pleased indeed with the joy that comes from working with you. Zach said very clearly that this really is a different kind of summit because it's explicitly looking at food from a systems perspective. And I'd like to pick up from where Zach left us to talk myself about the dialogues from the food systems perspective as an opening. And then what I'd like to do is to go into detail about the dialogues. My colleagues, Marlene and Florence in particular, will help me to stick to time. And I see that there are a number of comments already coming in. And I hope those of you who are on the call won't hesitate to come in with quite clear questions and comments, because that will then help us to explain and indeed to go into more detail as to what it is we're talking about. I'm going to, as I talk about the dialogues, going to also give you a little bit of history as to experience that we've had with FoodSystems dialogues in various forms since we started working on this during 2018, just because I think in this particular grouping, there are many people who have been associated with the past and will want to know how we've carried it through. I mean, it goes without saying that Zach's framing is a very similar framing to the one that we use. We start always by saying that food systems are complex, they're local, they involve multiple people with very different perspectives and roles. And because of their complexity, in general, they've been seen as quite hard to look at in their totality. And very often, what happens is that people take a bit of the food system and say, we're going to work on this bit. And so we get a detailed dive into a particular part. But in the context of this summit coming up in September 2021, we're actually trying to take a wide angle view of food systems, seeing them as one very definite set of activities that actually is relevant to all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. And because we've also learned through COVID and through climate change, just how important food systems are for every aspect of the future of humanity, we're also seeing that it's really urgent to give food systems our concerted attention. So how do you take a systemic approach to something as complex as food in multiple locations? Well, in our experience, you have to work with the perspectives of the multiple actors who are involved in food systems. And working with different perspectives is only possible if there is space for people with very different perspectives to come together and to bring their different views to the table, and then to explore their various points of view with each other in as open a way as possible. Now, some will say, that's fine, but there are an awful lot of people who've got fixed views. But our starting position in working on food systems is that actually, although some have quite fixed views and are not ready to shift, the majority of people and the majority of groups of people who are working in food systems recognize that change is inevitable. And in fact, recognize that change is happening in food systems from week to week and month to month, because that's what happens in food. You have to adapt to the seasons, to the weather, to the demand, to the supply. So because these are systems that are subject to change anyway, there's plenty of opportunity for that change to occur in different ways as a result of different groups of stakeholders in food systems exploring with each other. And that's where the dialogue comes in. The dialogue is the opportunity for multiple actors to be together in a structured way to explore food systems, taking account of the perspectives of others, as well as working from the positions that they've had and held for a long time. And we have watched this work, myself and actually several others on this call, because we've had the privilege of being in a program of food systems dialogues that was first mooted at the end of 2017. That was when senior actors from the World Economic Forum, Dominic Warre, from EAT, Gunhild Stordalen, and from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, Peter Backer, came together and said, we'd like to set up a different process for actors who are working on food to be able to come together and think through the journey to the future. They were joined by two other organizational groups. One was the Food and Land Use Coalition, led by Jeremy Oppenheim and Melissa Pinfield, and the other is the Global Alliance to Improve Nutrition, led by Lawrence Haddad. The dialogues themselves took a lot of preparation. It was over 6 months of thinking through what was involved, and they were launched at the Stockholm Food Forum in June 2018. And since then, there have been around 40 dialogue events involving more than 4,000 different people, and multiple themes have come out and have been a very broad group of stakeholders involved. I say approximately 40 events because actually the food systems dialogues have now been given a life of their own. They're taking place all over the world through virtual dialogue processes with the dialogues in a box format. And at the heart of this is Arnie O'Donoghue, who's on this call, the manager of the food systems dialogues. But we've got there through the efforts of Laura Ovies and Christina Pavlescu, Bridget Fitzgerald, all the people who helped to make the food systems dialogues happen. And then towards the end of last year, as the work on the Food Systems Summit was developing, there was a strong sense that in order to make the Food Systems Summit truly a people's summit with widespread involvement, there was need for a process to get broad engagement of multiple stakeholders through a mechanism that gives everybody an opportunity to engage. And shortly after she was appointed, Dr. Kalibata, the special envoy, said to myself and my colleagues, could you offer us an approach to bring the food systems dialogues into the summit process, but actually considerably changed from what you've been doing up to now. Dr. Kalibata said, please help us have a style of food systems dialogues that can be used by countries to develop and then shape and then express their own pathways towards sustainable food systems, involving all the different stakeholders in the nation who can possibly be involved, and doing it in a way that's as structured as possible so that it aligns with the rest of the summit preparation. Wow, that was an exciting challenge, because it's a considerable shift from what we'd been doing with the food systems dialogues before, and it's quite exciting to watch it happen. And Dr. Kalibata went further. She said, I'd like you to propose food systems dialogues that could be taken on by national authorities in countries. Then she said, I'd like food systems dialogues aligned with global processes. And the third request was for food systems dialogues that could be done by anybody, anywhere, with whoever they wanted to do them as their own independent activity. And the request to us was to find a way in which the overall work for food systems dialogues could be synthesized right across the countries, through the independent process, through the global mechanisms. And that's what we've been working on during the last few months, and that's what we're talking about today. And I think that the first thing to say is that we have been convinced since we started in 2018 that dialogue is an approach that helps people shift position, sometimes experimentally, a what if kind of conversation. But sometimes they'll get together with others and actually do things differently, again, to see what happens. And then over time, they may well take on these new ways of thought and action because they find that they are helpful. It's not a sudden bang, everything changes from 1 minute to the next. No, it's actually a feeling your way into different ways of doing things. And that's what system change has to be. It's never a clean, linear process. It always happens through connections between different people, exploration and experimentation, finding synergies, and where they feel good, then moving ahead, making choices to work differently, thinking through issues using different logic, changing the way in which trade-offs are made, but always engaging with others to find different ways of working. So that's the theory. How are we going to do it? Well, checking the time quickly. Yeah, hurry up, David. What we're going to do is we're going to create a situation within which structured dialogue can be initiated, reflecting on the 5 big themes of the summit as expressed in the 5 action tracks, that this can be done within countries, and it can be done independently, it can be done globally, and that there will be a methodology that's offered to everybody to use, but it's not offered with such strength and force that there is a limited space for the users to adapt it. No, we offer a methodology as a suggestion, but then the users use what of it they wish. However, there are a few things that are worth stressing. Number 1, there are some principles of engagement for the summit, 7 of them, that are absolutely key, that have been developed for the summit and that are on the summit website. And the dialogues have to follow those principles, which means 2 key things. 1, that they have to look at the urgency of food system transformation. And secondly, whatever happens in the dialogues, they've got to be as inclusive as possible, doing everything possible not to keep people out, doing everything possible to include as widely as possible. Diversity is good here. And even I want to go further and say divergence is good, because unless we are embracing of all views, unless we are taking this wide angle approach to food, then there's just no way we're going to be able to collectively shift the systems towards sustainability. And that's why for the country dialogues, the one that we call the member state dialogues, we're suggesting that national authorities use them to actually develop and shape and then build support for their own pathways to food system sustainability by 2030. So their pathways for the next decade can start to take some kind of shape during the coming months. Of course, this doesn't mean that we're trying to trample over or in any way put aside existing work that's going on. In fact, the opposite. We'd love it if in doing the dialogue work, all the experience in the country of looking at links between food and poverty, food and health, food and nutrition, food and the environment, food and climate, food and gender, food and trade. We'd like all those issues to be brought into the dialogues, and the more the merrier, and used as the basis for coming up with this pathway, and at the same time to get the different actors in country to think about what they can commit to do to push things forward along the pathway. And to get there, we've got a standardized approach for convening, curating, and facilitating the dialogues. Standardization makes it easier to relate to the principles of the summit. Standardization makes it easier to synthesize the results of the dialogue into something that can then be used in the different parts of the summit preparation, the action track, the science group, the champions network, and so on. So there are people who we need for these dialogues. And the most important person by far is the person who's called the convener. The convener is the organizer. The convener is the connector of the different stakeholders. The convener is somebody who's a true systems thinker. The convener is an entrepreneur. The convener loves synthesizing different things together. The convener has broad arms and embraces everybody and says, come together. And then The individual dialogue needs a master or mistress of ceremonies, a curator who presides over the event, who says, welcome, come in to the event. When you're actually physically together, the curator makes everybody feel at home. The curator actually makes the event happen. And then the facilitator has to be sitting with smaller discussion groups, probably 8 to 10 people, to get them to talk issues through with each other. The facilitator helps make sure nobody's left out, everybody engages. And then to help all this happen, the conveners need to have supporters. And in countries that are part of the UN system, in countries where there is a UN presence, then the main supporter is the UN country team consisting of the UN resident coordinator and the representatives of key UN system entities like the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Food Programme, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, the World Health Organization.
So we have, young families.
And so we are just holding everybody together and supporting the convener and trying to make sure then that others can come in and support as well, such as local farmers organizations, such as local councils for Business Council for Sustainable Development, local consumer organizations just come in and support the convener. So each dialogue has a discussion session where you go into small groups and talk, facilitated. You are then also having a summary session with a small group share with each other. But the discussion sessions are quite interesting because each discussion group thinks about the future of the food system, say 10 years ahead, and also thinks about the steps to get there that can be taken now. And it's that distinction between looking ahead, the art of transformation on the one hand, and the actions in the current political reality. That's what makes the discussions so rich. Several of you I know have been in them. I hope you'll agree with me that that format works. I hope you'll also agree with me that it works best if the whole actual discussion session lasts for about 1.25 to 1.5 hours, and then is followed after a break by the reporting session. And if you've got, say, 8 or 9 discussion tables, you need 5 minutes per table to report back, plus some good time for conversation as well. Altogether, discussion plus report back is about 4 hours, and it's great. And if you can keep it good and long for the discussion session without too many introductory speeches, then it's even better. You have to have 1 or 2, but try to keep them short. We think that several of these dialogues, perhaps a month interval apart from each other, is great because you get positions shifting over time. They've been in a conversation, people go back to where they've been before, and then they come back to the next one. There's a real advance. We've got a slight problem, that is, as Zach said, COVID, but we've been working really hard with Arnie and Christina, who was with us before, and others in the team on how to establish a system for dialogues that can run virtually. And that's done using a platform like this one, Zoom Pro, or a similar platform that allows for separate breakout groups. You can go further and you can have interpretation as well. You can do quite a lot with these. And I think those of us who've been doing the Zooming on and off since COVID started, quite in earnest, realize that you can do a lot with this. So don't give up if the COVID is making it difficult to meet. Consider using Zoom or some hybrid where some of your meetings are done using a platform like this and others are done using the more normal face-to-face. To help get the discussion topics right, we think that some of your tables, you should be discussing things that are linked to what's in the 5 action tracks. We also think it's good, impossible in the discussions also to think about integrated approaches to the total transformation of food systems so that they achieve all the different purposes that are called for. What really matters is that we get the conveners to fill in the feedback forms in a way that makes it possible to pull together the results and synthesize most of you know that synthesizing qualitative information can be immensely rewarding, but also frustrating. So in the feedback form, we ask for keywords, we ask to know which action track you're close to, we ask you to link the discussion topic and what comes out of the dialogues. And there is a fairly structured way to get information out of the different discussion groups that can be really, really helpful. And once the feedback is brought into a place where it can be looked at, then analysis and synthesis becomes possible. This is being done this time using quite a sophisticated system. It's using a special dedicated website. The website is called summitdialogues.org, and the actual part of the website where you come into the dialogue process is called the gateway. And once a person has decided that they are going to be a convener, in the case of the member states dialogues, they are nominated by the government. In the case of the independent dialogues, it's more a self-nomination. In the case of the global dialogues, we've got a special process organized by the special envoy. Once you are the convener, you come in, you identify yourself into the dialogues gateway on the Summit Dialogues website. And that then means that you're in touch with us and that we can be talking to each other. And once you're there, we can contact you, you can contact us, you can access trainings for conveners or trainings for curators and facilitators. The trainings can be for both the member state dialogues and the independent dialogues, and the work is done in 6 UN languages plus Portuguese, 6+1. That is the current number of languages. We've got everything, all the material on the websites in English at the moment, but the other languages are coming really fast, and we hope to have them certainly starting by the end of this month and then on. The main document on the website to use is called the Curators Manual. And this will be augmented in a few days by the handbook for those who want to organize the member state dialogues. That's, we hope, 195 member states with their 3 stages, starting as soon as possible with an initiation dialogue, then with a deep exploration throughout the country through a series of dialogues in the 2nd stage, through to a consolidation dialogue in the 3rd stage. And then there will also be a manual for the conveners of independent dialogues coming up shortly as well. We think if this all works, there will be much greater local interest in a systems approach to food within individual countries, within contiguous countries, within regions, and globally. We think that this will set a pathway for countries to continue working on their own journey towards sustainable food systems, as well as providing fabulous material that countries can use in the summit. There's never been anything like this, as far as I can tell. And lastly, we hope that it will help everybody to come to agreement on how to move towards sustainable food systems. Thank you very much for the chance to brief. I know there's lots of questions, and here we go. Now, there are some questions about the summit. There are some questions about the dialogues. Zach, I hope that you're okay and comfortable to respond to some of the questions with me. And I'd like to go straight to a question for Zach. Zach, if you don't mind, I'll read it to you from Nicholas Paris of Action Against Hunger in France. What exactly, says Nicholas, will be the outcome documents of the summit? And are there discrepancies? What will happen if there are discrepancies between the conclusions of the various action tracks and the dialogues? Who will decide on the actual conclusions to be considered at the summit? Zach, would you like to take those?
Sure, and thanks so much. I missed the name of the questioner, but I really appreciate the question because it's an opportunity to underscore what's a really critical point. There is no negotiated outcome document of this summit. Member states are not negotiating a text. No one is negotiating a text. So that's really a key point here. The emphasis is on thinking and talking and dialoguing around what actions we'd like to see to achieve a text that's already agreed, the 2030 agenda and its 17 sustainable development goals, no negotiated away 5 goals. So that's really the key point. Now, will there be discrepancies as countries, stakeholders, colleagues discuss these things and think about what? Obviously, there's some disagreement around the what we need to do to achieve the goals that are contained in the 2030 agenda, of course. That's natural and normal and even good. You know, that's one idea of the summit, is to be able to create a space to have those discussions, to be able to invite everyone in a untraditional dynamic, as David was talking about, and have that discourse in a way that removes us from some of the normal ways that we've been doing things, and that frankly aren't getting us where we need to go fast enough based on the objectives that we have already set for ourselves. So that's the idea here. So there's really nothing to necessarily arbitrate at the end. The hope would be that different types of stakeholders, whether they be member states, civil society organizations of different kinds, private sector, are coming forward with their own ideas and ideally commitments for action to meet these agreed objectives by 2030. And those will hopefully exist in harmony. One of the other discussions that need to unfold is how we track these commitments going forward after the summit, and identify opportunities to come back and review and make sure that people are delivering on the progress they've committed to make towards our agreed goals. I hope that helps. Over.
Thank you very much, Zach. I think that I probably should also have added into my remarks that this is a Secretary General summit, which means the outcome is not negotiated. And to really reiterate what Zach said, that despite that, our special envoy and our Secretary General and Deputy Secretary General are absolutely determined that this is open, inclusive, and fully engaging. UN Charter starts "We the peoples." It doesn't start "We the governments" or "We anybody else." And that actually takes me to the next question, which is really important. And I'm suggesting that Zach and I both reflect on this. There's no reason why we will give the same answer. It comes from Eric Darrier of Greenpeace International. And I think every word in this question is important. I'll say them slowly. How can we make sure that big ag, big food, and tech fix corporation, economic and financial interests do not hijack the agenda, the outcome, and the whole process? Eric, I mean, in life, making sure or ensuring is always something that I have been wary of committing to when I've been in the United Nations. I had 17 years, and I was often asked to ensure things, and I had to say, it's really hard in international affairs to create rigid ring fences around any process. And I mean, I found this in dealing with COVID and other infectious diseases, dealing with food, dealing with nutrition, dealing with numerous other things. But what I would like to just say is that the value system that underpins the decisions being taken by the UN leadership with regard to this summit is one that is aligned 100% to all the 17 goals and 169 targets, as well as the underlying principles of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In addition, Mr. Guterres, in his instructions for the summit to take place, said very clearly, I want this to be a totally inclusive summit that focuses on the issues that endanger the sustainability of our planet for all its inhabitants, emphasis on all, and also which looks at equitable access to the assets available on our earth, and has asked us to do it. Now, we can't ensure that equity is going to happen. We can't ensure that we will reach zero emissions in climate. We can't ensure that agreements on Paris or others will be reached. But I'm going to say that we are doing, I think, everything within the sphere of responsibilities that each of us have to prevent any interests that work in any way against the Sustainable Development Agenda from, I'm going to use your word, hijacking what happens in the summit. Zach, would you like to comment, please?
Sure.
I'm implementing, or by all means disagree.
No, I don't think anything to disagree there with there, David, but thank you. And I guess I would just say a couple things. I mean, one, picking up on what you said. I mean, in some sense, the agenda is set. It's the 2030 agenda, which is something that's mutually reinforcing. So there is not one goal or one target elevated above any other. If we were to say achieve we were to feed all people without lifting up women in the process or achieving equitable outcomes in other ways, or for example, that we would have failed on all of the SDGs, wouldn't we? So human rights are embedded in the 2030 agenda. Principles of equity and inclusion are embedded in the 2030 agenda. Inequality, multiple forms of deprivation and inequality are what informed the design of the 2030 agenda. So I think it's important to remember all of that as we think about what it is that we're working towards, and understanding that we have to work in this harmonized way. The second is, this hijacking, and I guess I would pick up also on what David was saying. Is how do we ensure? Well, we can ensure that through our and your collective engagement. We're looking forward to your, these questions like this one, I think are helpful, because it helps highlight something that people feel passionately about, and rightly so, and want to see solutions that are presented and delivered on that align with the values that we'd like to see in our world, and that we agree on, and things that we want to work towards collectively. So I'd encourage, to the extent that I can, to bring that spirit of engagement into the process. That you bring ideas and solution-oriented thinking towards concepts that can support transformation of food systems, or a continued shift of food systems towards being more sustainable, more resilient, more inclusive, and that deliver on all of the objectives of the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. That means that we have to work with people sometimes that we don't want to, but it's also embracing the complex reality of our world, and not remaining in silos, but taking this as an opportunity to engage with people in productive ways towards solutions. Over.
Thanks, Zach. There is a follow-up question from Lucy Sullivan, which I'm going to ask Lucy, because it's just come in, this question. I'm going to ask Lucy if we can come back to it after we've answered some other questions that came in before. But Zach, you may, I don't know whether you've seen it, if you look at it on the chat, and it says, basically, are there criteria for companies that want to participate in the summit? And then the rider to it is, are there any barriers to entry? And Zach, if you want to take that question, just jump in and say, I would like to take Lucy's question, or if you want me to take the question, I will. Zach, I heard you say something. What did you say?
Well, I haven't seen Lucy's question, but I'm happy to speak to it, whatever it is.
So if you could look at it now, because obviously it's a really important question, probably for many participants. I'd like to go to Aletis Kotsis Giannarakis. I hope I've spelt that right. Aletis Kotsis Giannarakis says, can an organization such as an NGO organize a food system summit dialogue at both national and international level? The answer is yes. You can organize a food system dialogue at local level, going, even round a table in your kitchen. You can organize a food system summit dialogue at subnational level, in a locality, in a city, in a province. You can organize a dialogue nationally. You can organize a dialogue between nations. You can organize a dialogue globally. That is your option. The only thing that we ask is that you respect the 7 principles of the Food Systems Summit. And obviously there's no hard and fast indicator for what respecting each principle means. And so this is very much left up to you. But the notion of diversity and inclusion is absolutely critical. There is to be no setting limits, no exclusion. Rebecca Cantor at University of Chile. This is an important one. How can you be inclusive when people might have problems using virtual platforms? They might have low digital literacy or lack of internet signal. So we've been talking to a lot of people within the UN system in the last 3 weeks, and several of them are making extra effort to create capacity for people who are in positions where they've not got telephone signals or not got internet access or not got any way of participating, to be enabled to connect. And this is seen by the Secretary General as an absolutely key requirement for participation in this time when physical gatherings are reduced because of COVID. And any of you who feels that they have access to assets that would make this possible, please, please, please be in touch with us. And some of you have already done this, linked to Food Systems Dialogues. There was somebody on the list of participants who I knew did this with some Indigenous communities in New Zealand. And I think it is really important helping people to access through setting up hotspots and so on, where they can come together if they're in a family or in a bubble and communicate. Really important. And so same question, same speaker, Rebecca says, can the dialogues be tailored to the concomitant crises going on at the time of the event? Absolutely, yes. Not only COVID, but we have locusts, we have tropical storms, we have serious problems of production in various settings because of floods. We have constant droughts in parts of the world. We have situations of supply chain fracture. We have particular diseases of livestock. Now, obviously, please take account of everything. Food systems are so massive in variety. We'd very much like that to happen. Ian Randall says, during COVID times, the dialogues will be virtual. Will you maintain the geographical boundaries of member state dialogues, or will they be open to international participation? That's up to the convener of the member state. If the member state convener says, I would like to invite some international friends, great. And this has actually been happening already in some dialogues in countries, absolutely. And I think also I want to say that during COVID times, there are lots of experimental operations possible in terms of timing, in terms of agenda. Please do so. David Bent says, are there any common errors that the self-started dialogues should avoid? I think whoever organizes a dialogue, please be careful about diversity. And in the manuals that you're getting, both the curators manual and the handbook on member state dialogues and the handbook on independent dialogues, there are significant sections about trying to make sure that you get diversity. Some people say to me, can a company organize a dialogue? I say, yeah, of course. Some people say, can a farmers organization organize dialogue? Yeah, but please, remember the diversity. Don't just have other companies. If you're a company, don't just have other farmers organizations. If you're a farmer organization, that's the key here, is diversity. Because we work from the assumption that connecting with people that have got different perspectives, even if you can't stand each other, is still desirable. And I know that for many of you, this will be surprising. And many of you will think, well, what is this? They're saying we've got to be sitting next to people we really don't get on with. And we're saying, yep, because in our experience, that matters. Now, Krista Maruka says, how can we learn who are the national conveners nominated in our region? Answer, this will become clear on the Summit Dialogues website. It's still early days. We've only had 2 conveners nominated so far for the member state dialogues or national dialogues. We're welcoming others. It is very much something that we will have available on the website when it's going. Eric Darrier, hello, says, who will be the curators? These are selected by the conveners. The conveners have the responsibility here, where it's convener of a member state dialogue, a convener of an independent dialogue, or the convener of the global dialogues. And the conveners select the curators. But we have suggested in the various manuals and handbooks that we're producing that conveners should take advice from those who are available to support them, including the various offices of the UN system, as well as representatives of different organizations that want to be helpful. Zach, could I invite you to perhaps pick up on the question from Lucy Sullivan? Zach, please.
Sure. So thanks so much, and thanks again for the question. You know, certainly this is something that's not endemic to this process only, where large corporate actors that have questionable business practices would seek to engage in a global process of some kind. I don't normally see arms manufacturers at UN events, but I take the point, and I think it's quite valid. You know, there's a few. Basically, the door is open. But I don't think that we would want. We also don't want to see an outcome where I think that we'd want to see, you know, blue washing or green washing of outcomes and commitments of anything emerging from here. And, you know, by engaging in a process like this, where everything is quite transparent, I think that companies would be exposing themselves to quite a bit of critique if they have those kinds of practices. Second would be thinking about, again, this shared accountability that all of us have. By coming together, we have the opportunity to shine a light on actors with questionable practices, and not only these businesses, but others as well. It's also an opportunity to come back and say, you know, there's been a lot of commitments in these areas in the past, not necessarily a systems perspective, but on food. I think there's been a lot of commitments that haven't been delivered on by all sorts of actors. I would be interested in hearing that kind of accountability discourse emerge through this, and how can we be approaching things at a global level that ensures better accountability going forward. So I think it's a chance to revisit some of these things. And if there's some naming and shaming that happens, I think that can be positive. I'd also like to celebrate progress that's being made by some actors as they begin to shift practices, as they recognize the reality of what's going on in our world, that it's deeply inequitable, that we're facing a climate crisis, and that rights are being threatened around the world. And I think that's becoming more and more obvious. And I think we're seeing some movement, but we clearly need to see more. So I think that we, in some ways, certainly not you know, slave labor, but by inviting some of these actors into the discussion, I think we potentially do more than we would by not engaging with them at all. That's a bit of a personal perspective, but that's how I see things unfold. I hope that's helpful. Just if I could also just speak to the inclusivity thing, which I think is really important in the time of COVID, and it's also why I'm so excited to see some of the people here. Is that this is also something that we hear a lot in UN processes about, well, how do you reach everybody? You say you want to reach people. Well, we're also, you know, we're looking to you. You share that desire to reach as many people as possible. So please help do that. You know, there's never going to be something perfect, at least the way the world is constructed today, unless we make progress on the agenda that we agree is really important to make progress on. So your help and your willingness to engage in this, and I take this, your presence here as something, as some indication of that, I think is really encouraging to be able to help us reach the marginalized and the vulnerable in this discourse going forward. Over.
So Zach, thank you. I've just perhaps given some of the comments in the chat just to say, I mean, we're trying. We really do want to get an opportunity for food systems to be good for people's health and nutrition, particularly the health and nutrition of small children. But frankly, given what COVID's done, food systems have got to move a long, long way with the massive increase in hunger that we've seen in the last 10 months. We want food systems to be good for farmers, particularly small scale farmers. My own life, 5 years spent in South Asia, just seeing what was happening in small scale agriculture. I'm, I suppose, driven by a wish to not see more and more farmers finding themselves unable to make a living, their children having to go and work in factories so that they can bring money home, and parents having to go off for 6 months a year to build roads somewhere in order to bring money back. I mean, that just seems to me terrible, and I want that to stop. And there's 500 million small scale farming households, and it's hugely important. I want agriculture and food systems to be compatible with sustainable ecosystems and to stop damaging biodiversity. Fact is that 75% of the people in food systems are women, and sometimes the conditions under which they live and work are terrible. We've seen how workers in food, in meat factories, fish factories, vegetable processing plants, sandwich factories, all over the world have become really major centers for transmission of the COVID virus, causing all sorts of distress. We've seen how migrant workers have been working under terrible conditions in agriculture, also subject to disease, and that needs attention. We've seen how agriculture contributes so much, agriculture and food, to climate change, an enormous contribution. And I suppose I, as a public health doctor, am utterly committed to trying to do everything I can to actually shift this. I don't want it to go on. And I worked in this area for several decades. And so on behalf of everybody who's involved in this, I thank you. I know that not everybody is happy with what we're trying to do, but we can't see any alternative. After all, things have been going bad for quite a long time, and I've been so affected by what I've seen COVID do in terms of increasing levels of hunger, levels of malnutrition, levels of despair, inequity. I think it's terrible. And so for me, this food summit is really important, really important. I commend it to you. I hope we can work together. And yeah, I know that many of you will wish that it could be different, and I know some of you won't want to be part of it, but those of you who wish, please join. And I thank those of you who don't want to be part of it for joining this discussion, because it's great. Let's keep talking. That's the secret. Keep talking, keep connecting. Thank you. Thanks to everybody who organized this briefing.